The Torchbearers, compiled by Elena Larson. In the 1980s, Elena Larson asked that a cousin from each of the 12 tribes of Harris submit a story about growing up in their parents' home, which would illustrate how the home of William and Alice had affected the homes that their grandchildren grew up in. It was to be a follow-up to Through the Eyes of a Child. They responded. We had stories told in the voices of Jim Marshall, Robert and Marva Owens, Carol Harris, Ellen, Daryl, Clarence, Keith, and Charlene Tilley, Elliot Melander, Melanie and Milton Gifford, Lisa Jones, Jared Higginson, Lynn Higginson, and Aunt Ruby. Elena lived in Pennsylvania at the time and asked Lisa Higginson Jones to tape these stories. The tape was played at a Harris reunion at Cherry Hill, Utah in 1987. Unfortunately, the second side of the tape got corrupted, and the last 5 stories were lost. The tape then languished in a drawer at Elena's house for over 30 years. In 2020, she felt a nudge to dig out that tape and do something about it. Neither Lisa nor she could find the original script, so Elena asked Boods, Bodleys, Higginsons, and Wardles to write new stories and record them. We had new technology for this. It should come out even better with stories, background music, and even photographs on a computer rather than a tape or a CD. So we have the first 7 stories as they were recorded over 30 years ago and are blessed to hear some voices that are no longer with us. We had a miracle, and some of the second side was recovered. So in several cases, we have 2 stories. We have the last 5 stories told with some voices that are still with us. A Bood granddaughter, Davina Garrett, Merlin Bodley, Cheryl Higginson, Linda Walker, and then we have the recovered story told by Aunt Ruby in the 1980s.
What was it like when you were a child? We pleaded to know, and we were told through the eyes of a child, and the telling of it changed us forever. How could Will and Alice have envisioned the result of that tiny spark that they lit together that many years ago? Little did they think of torch-bearing. The influence of their home now crisscrosses the nation, as their torch burns brightly in the lives of each succeeding generation. They were not perfect. That was not required. What was required was to do what they did, to grow, to try, to endure, to keep the torch burning no matter how terrible the struggle or how deep the joy. And isn't that now our own stewardship? The torch has been passed down to another generation, ours to lift up high, to carry with pride, as it lights the way for those whom we love more deeply than we ever dreamed was possible. The children in the home of Will and Alice grew up. They tried. They endured. They held the torch high, each in an individual way, but the pattern of love and of caring, of tears and of laughter was oh so similar. The story of one could be the story of all. The sparks and the fireworks, the smoldering and the glowing. These homes were wonderful, full of light and trials and mistakes and growing pains. And then they passed it on. These are glimpses of their light in their own homes as they repeated the ancient pattern of torch-bearing, as seen through the eyes of their own children, the next generation. of torchbearers.
Through the eyes of a child, as we learn to live, the world loomed large as can be. Through the eyes of a child, as we learn to love, each feeling was felt so intensely. As the years have flown, we have left our home, but we'll never forget one another. The past won't return, but from life we can learn that we're part of Dad and Mom and each other. Now we go home again through our memories to our home from where happiness came. Through the eyes of a child will be called again, and will never ever be the same.
Can anyone doubt the message of love and longing that radiates from the Marshall family, from parent to child to grandchild? Can anyone imagine that it will ever stop? The light of Will and Alice and the values that they treasured were indeed carried on by Nettie and Wren, and are the stuff of stories that span the generations.
"Dad, tell me a story," asked one of the many children that had invaded my home over the years. I was tired and maybe a little cranky, but I asked back, "What kind of a story?" I always have a story at the ready somewhere in my head. The little person sat for a moment and thought, and then as if a light flashed in his head, he said, "What was it like when Grandpa Harold was a boy?" I thought for a moment, and decided since I knew Grandpa Harold as well as his brothers and sisters and my grandmother Nettie and Papa Wren, I would be able to tell him of the childhood easily. If this never happened, it probably should have. A home is always busy with one thing or another when there are 9+ people living under one roof. Seems dishes are never totally done before there's a new batch of them to wash. Meals in those days were pretty much garden or homegrown food. They ate well, but money was very scarce. This story takes place in the summertime, so dinner had been creamed peas with new potatoes. Now dinner on the farm is in the middle of the day, and supper is in the evening. Genevieve was telling Lorraine and Shirley what to do so that the dishes would be done in time for supper. Lorraine would watch Genevieve take the dishes off the table, and then when Genevieve was not looking, she would put them back in their place on the table. Shirley giggled but didn't say anything. As soon as Genevieve turned back around, Lorraine and Shirley both washed dishes vigorously, so they wouldn't look guilty. In most cases, Genevieve didn't realize she had been taken, and continued to clean the table without even noticing what was going on. Grandma Nettie was brushing away at Maureen's long curls. You would think with a family the size of this one, no one would have time for primping, or taking time like this. Grandma Nettie would not allow her children to look like ragamuffins. Sometimes clothes were remade many times so that worn spots would not show, but every time someone got hand-me-downs or new clothes, they were proud. When clothes were finally completely shot, they went into a burlap bag that would be brought out during the winter months, and the old clothing would be woven or crocheted into rugs for the floor, or made into warm quilts for the many beds. Maureen had curls most of her life that she lived at home, and Grandma loved to brush it. It was a lot like Grandma Nettie's had been when she was a young girl. The dishes were finally done, and the table was set for dinner when Papa Wren and the boys came in from the barn. They didn't milk many cows, but when you do it by hand, it always took a little time. Leo and Glenn had fed the chickens and the calves while Harold had milked, and Papa had done the rest of the feeding. On a farm there is always something for everyone to do. As Papa entered the room, he grabbed Lorraine, who was 9, and danced her around the room. He whirled her wildly as she squealed with delight. Shirley, at age 4, grabbed Papa's leg and sat on his foot and said, "Papa, me next, me next." Instead, Papa just took big steps around the room, bouncing Shirley with every step, until she was laughing so hard she about fell off. Supper, like dinner, was normally things that were homemade, and this night was no exception. Homemade bread with preserves and milk. This old favorite was known as bread and milk. They all knelt at their benches around the table before eating for family prayer. They all knew this was done without exception. "Papa, can we have family hour tonight?" asked one of the children. With a twinkle in Papa's eye, he said, "I think we could take time for an hour." Sometimes it was at family hour when family business was discussed, and sometimes Papa would tell them a story. Games were often played, and most of all it was a time when everyone enjoyed being together. Grandma Nettie usually sat with her crochet hook in her hand and was able to keep busy creating some special project that she loved so much. Papa got on his hands and knees so that the little ones could ride on his back. Grandma Nettie was always afraid that one of the children would get hurt, and you could hear her say, "Now, Wren, be careful with Shirley," or "Wren, calm down, the children are going to be sick." She knew he wouldn't hurt a fly, but when it came to having fun and playing, Grandma Nettie always felt that she had 8 children of her own instead of 7. It seems that all family hours would end with someone asking Papa to sing "Hello Central, Give Me Heaven." Even though all of Grandma Nettie's and Papa Wren's children were raised by them, Papa Wren had 6 other children, also raised by them. Papa's first wife died of influenza, and so Papa married Grandma Nettie. They raised 13 children between them. Papa sang in his beautiful voice.
"Papa, I'm so sad and lonely," sobbed a tearful little child, "since dear Mama's gone to heaven. Papa, darling, you've not smiled. I will talk to her and tell her that we want her to come home. Just you listen and I'll call her on the telephone. Hello Central, give me heaven, for my Mama's there. You will find her with the angels on the golden stair. She'll be glad it's me who's speaking. Call her, won't you please? For I surely want to tell her we're so lonely here. When the girl received the message coming o'er the telephone, how her heart beat in that moment, and the wires seemed to mourn. I will answer just to please her. Yes, dear heart, I'll soon come home. Kiss me, Mama, kiss your darling through the telephone. Hello Central, give me heaven, for my Mama's there. You will find her with the angels on the golden stair. She'll be glad it's me who's speaking. Call her, won't you please? For I surely want to tell her we're so lonely here.
Sometime during the song, Lorraine had crawled under the table because it always made her cry, and she didn't want anyone to see her. Leo and Glenn would tease her, even though they felt that they could probably cry easily themselves. Well, I guess that is what it was like when Grandpa Harold was a boy. As I finished my story, I looked at my little one, who was now fast asleep in my arms. I carried the little one to his bed, and as I tucked him in, I whispered, "I don't know if it really happened that way or not, but if it didn't, it should have."
Others also have stories that are told and retold. This story, freeze-framed in 1949, is one that is familiar to all, the light of faith and hope carried high.
The year is 1949. 28 years have passed since Joseph Alma Owens took his young bride, Alice Alvaretta Harris, to the Salt Lake Temple in company with the Porrits and the Tillys. Although a doctor had told her that she could not survive any more childbirths after the first one, 6 lovely children have blessed their home. They live in a modest home in Glens Ferry, Idaho, where Alma works as a machinist on the Union Pacific Railroad. Alva is the Relief Society president, and Alma is a stake missionary. Their firstborn, Marva, a talented blonde-haired daughter, is happily married to her high school sweetheart, William A. Moats, who returned from his World War II military service in the Air Force and established an automobile dealership and repair business called Moats Auto Company in Glens Ferry. 2 daughters, Marcia Ann, age 6, and Bonnie Jean, age 2, cheer their busy home. William Selden, their oldest son, has a Purple Heart Award from a battle wound sustained in Okinawa and just returned home from a 2-year mission to the western states. His driving ambition is to become a medical doctor. He starts his training this fall. Joseph Lyle, the second son, is working and studying in Salt Lake City. He loved the M-Man and Gleaner activities and is expecting his mission call next year. Clarita, who was born on her older sister's 9th birthday, has just graduated from Glens Ferry High School. Bobby is a new deacon, and petite Karen Ray was baptized just last fall. The Owens family finances had permitted a few train trips to visit relatives in the Boise area 70 miles west, but in their 28 years of marriage, they had never really had a family vacation. But this year was going to be different. 2 weeks of relaxation were anticipated at Marva and Bill's spacious cabin in the mountains 50 miles north in Featherville. Let's hear the story in Elva's own words.
Daddy Joe was taking a 2-week leave from the shops. When the day came, we were packed and ready to go. But the fellow hadn't arrived to take Daddy's place at the shop. We waited until evening, then decided to go on up the canyon, and the men, Daddy and Bill Moats, would drive back in the morning to work. We went up in 2 cars, Marvin, Bill, and their 2 little ones in their car, and the rest of us in Dean Redford's car, as we didn't have a car of our own. Dean had kindly offered to take us up. With us were Selden, Clarita, Bob, Karen, and Shirley Thompson, a friend of Clarita's. It was dusk when we arrived, and we had to cross the creek on a 4-foot diameter log that was used as a bridge to get to the cabin. Bill got out of the car and said, "I will go get a lantern. The rest of you wait here." Marva said, "I could cross that in my sleep," and loaded her arms. She crossed the creek, followed by Marcia and Karen Ray, who were 6 and 9 at the time. I followed with my arms full of clothing. I got on the log, and a voice said to me loud and clear, "You can't make it." I hesitated a moment, then thought, if those little kids can, I can. I took 1 step, and down I went, into the creek, landing on a big rock. The children called, "Mom fell in." I answered, "I'm okay, the water isn't deep." But when I tried to move my leg, I couldn't. Bill and Daddy came with a lantern. Dean Redford, Selden's friend, pulled me out and carried me across the log into the cabin. Daddy and Marva took off my wet clothes and put on dry ones. Then Dean carried me back across the log and propped me up in the back seat of his car, and we, Daddy and Selden, Dean, and I, started back to town. When we got there, they called Dr. Rulene, who met us at his office. After an x-ray, he said, "Take her to Boise." Daddy and Selden took me to Boise, again in Dean's car, where we arrived at 4 a.m. They put me to bed and packed my leg with sandbags until the doctor arrived. The doctor said, "You sure fixed yourself up, breaking your leg in 2 places." Later that day, they took me to surgery, but decided to try to work the bones into place without surgery, which they did. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and 6 more weeks in a cast. Daddy and Bill and Selden went back to work the next day, while Marva and the kids spent 1 week at the cabin, then went home. Thus ended our first vacation.
It was 2 more busy years before the Owens family had the courage to plan another vacation. That next year, Clarita moved to Salt Lake City, Selden was married to Carol Diane Jensen, and Lyle had left on his mission to the eastern states. The Owens family had just purchased their first family car for $100 from Moats Auto Company, with a $10 down payment taken largely from Bobby's paper route savings. The following spring, Clarita married Jewel Edward Lawrence, a longtime friend of Bill Moats. Now Elva continues her story.
In August of that year, we had planned on attending the pageant the second year Lyle was involved in it on his mission. But a few weeks before we were scheduled to leave, I climbed up on a rocking chair to reach some genealogy books from a high shelf. The chair tipped, I fell and hurt my leg. Infection set in. I had dislodged a splinter that had been broken from the main bone when I broke my leg before. The doctor advised me to keep my leg propped up and keep ice packs on it, which I did. My leg started turning dark. So I took the train to Boise and saw the doctor who had taken care of me when I broke my leg. He began treating me and said he must see me every other day. I went to Lillis and Reuben's home to stay. Ella was working at Britta Field's bridal shop, so she got me a job there. I sat sewing all day with my leg propped up on a bench, taking time off only to see the doctor. The days went by and the infection still showed. The doctor lanced the swollen, angry red sore and inserted a drain wick to help relieve the pressure. The weekend came, and if we were going to the pageant, we must leave Monday night. The doctor said, "Any extended trip for you this year is out of the question." I went home to tell my family to go without me. Daddy Joe said they wouldn't go without me. I replied that I had prayed and prayed, but my leg had not improved. Daddy Joe said that there was one thing we hadn't done, and that was to fast and pray. So Saturday, Daddy Joe and I fasted and had prayer. Then we took a glass of milk so we could sleep and fasted again till Sunday evening. This time the entire family joining in the fast. Then we had Bishop Carl Anderson come and assist Daddy in giving me a priesthood blessing. Monday morning, I left for Boise to see the doctor. He examined my leg and could find no trace of infection. The doctor said, "You can go on that trip if you keep your leg propped up while riding and don't crowd it too much. But if your leg starts showing any sign of pink again, go to a doctor no matter where you are."
A very grateful and excited family of 4 caught the 9 o'clock train east toward Palmyra, New York, armed with a family railroad pass, a new traveling dress for Elva, a suitcase full of food for the trip, and a treasury of $125, 50 of which had been borrowed from Elva's brother Urshel. The next 2 weeks were filled with exciting visits to church historical sites, several performances of the pageant, and time spent with Lyle at missionary conference sessions in the Sacred Grove, sometimes with President David O. McKay, recently sustained as the prophet. The return trip included a quick visit to the Canadian side of the breathtaking Niagara Falls for the happy foursome. Elva's leg gave them no problems, and the $125 covered expenses, plus a new pair of shoes for the missionary. It is now 1986. Alma and Elva are with Grandpa and Grandma Harris. The family has grown. Now we number 164 members, another budding army. More work, more workers, more and more memories through the eyes of a child.
Memories burn brightly in our hearts, and sometimes focus on the familiar things that were a part of our homes. Sometimes things became the symbol of the torch.
Picture a large room with high ceilings, a large bay window filled with greens of the houseplant variety. It was simply but pleasantly furnished. In the center of the room, one on the north side and one on the south side, were two furnace vents, usually covered by sleepy children on cold winter mornings and winter evenings also. The focal point of the room was a large wooden table, our dining room table. The chairs neatly stood in place when not in use at mealtime, at which time they were pulled out and filled with happy, talkative children. Daddy sat at the head of the table with the currant baby on his lap, a place of honor. We knelt each morning by those chairs to ask the Lord to guide our footsteps for the day. In the evenings we thanked him for his graciousness to us. Our first uttered prayers were given as we knelt together there. The Lord's Prayer was patiently repeated until it was engraved in our memories and our hearts. Sundays always found the table covered with Mom's specialties. There was always chicken and homemade noodles or roasted chicken and dressing with mashed potatoes and brown bread, the one treat that I learned to appreciate later. Mom's homemade ice cream always topped things off just right, and our Sunday supper of bread and milk and jelly was fit for a king. The scene changed slightly to the unfinished basement of our huge old-fashioned three-story house. The table and all our home furnishings were arranged comfortably, although awkwardly, in the new surroundings, and life went on in its usual manner. But Daddy literally raised the roof. Yes, first came off the roof, then the attic, next the upstairs, and all the siding and lath and plaster, and the house became a skeleton, which soon became a lovely modern home for the Harvey Harris family. Our daily conversation at the table was now filled with comments about plaster and lath and nails and slivers, then rafters and 2x4s, shingles and insulation. Mom reported how Daddy dropped the hammer on her head as she had handed it up to him, so she leaned over to pick it up. This caused Daddy great consternation, as he supposed she was knocked unconscious. The family concluded that only her beautiful, heavy, red hair had saved her from harm. Little Marlene was the next near victim. Someone happened to see a strange shadow on the floor and looked up to see the baby clinging to the subroofing 10 or 12 feet overhead. Oh, what a fright. Those days found the table crowded but comfortable. They were the only few months that the family lived all together. Ricky was there in his seat of honor on Daddy's lap. David was preparing for college and a mission. Rael and Faye learned to share in the chores of housekeeping and tending the little ones. Larry's bout with rheumatic fever concerned us all. Joanne and Marlene kept things interesting at all times. These were times of loving and learning, but the scene would change soon again, and our wooden table would be sold at auction to the highest bidder. We would sit at another table in another home with fewer chairs needed to seat us all, but the events and conversations experienced around our wooden dining room table will always bring to me a feeling of security, well-being, and love.
And just what does the torch symbolize? Of what does the light comprise? Alma and Ella Tilley taught their children well and thoroughly lessons of light, to choose the right, the value of work, the necessity of sacrifice, forgiveness, and the power of example.
Alma and Ella Tilley, the lesson. Where do we begin? What do we say? What in our family has influenced our lives the most? Maybe we should begin by stating that everything influences us, some for good, some for bad. But hopefully, the most influence was good. Time will tell. We as children were given the opportunity to make choices during our growing up years.
Choose the right when the choice is placed before you. Make good decisions. Our parents didn't override our decisions, especially if there was a lesson to be learned. When I, Daryl, was a pre-teenager, I got weary of going to church for the 3 to 4 hours it took for meetings and waiting for parents. I expressed this dislike about going. I said the meetings were too long, and I got tired, and I wanted to stay home. So Mother told me that would be fine. I could stay home if I would get the family dinner. After several instructions of how to do the chicken, potatoes, and make a cake, they were off to church, leaving me with my decision to stay home. I busied myself with the task of cooking dinner. I followed Mother's instructions and did a very good job. After I had everything done, the family was still not home from church. There was a long, anxious wait for me, wondering when they would be home. To me, it seemed a long, long time. I learned through experience that doing what we want at the time is not always the best decision. They taught, and hopefully we learned.
We were taught the value of work. To teach children to work is a primary duty of parenthood. We were given the example that working together can be enjoyable, that a job well done can be rewarding. All Dad had to say was, when we get the work done, we can go to the show tonight. And miraculously, the work was done in half the time. The boys always worked out in the field and the barn with Dad, and the girls were privileged to help Mother in the house. Well, anyway, Ellen was, Charlene being too young at the time to be very much help. I, feeling my task of helping Mother all the time wasn't quite fair, stomped my feet and refused to help Mother, declaring I would like to go and help Dad once in a while. So arrangements were made that one of the boys would trade with me for a few days. It was haying time, and I eagerly looked forward to going out and working in the hayfield on top of a hay wagon, tromping hay down, so that more hay could be loaded on. Do you think Dad deliberately pitched the hay faster on me to discourage me? One day was enough of helping Dad. At the end of a day's work, there was listening to radio programs and either Dad or Mother reading stories from good books. They taught, and hopefully we learned.
There were sacrifices made by our parents. Sacrifice is the ability to put others and their needs before your own. There were the many nights Mother stayed up late to sew some article of clothing for a birthday or Christmas. The night Dad stayed up on Christmas Eve to make a table, chairs, and cupboard for our skimpy Christmas. There were many trips to Nampa, Caldwell, and Boise, which held the state fair, to show the boys 4-H calves in competition. Dad finally found out how the prize heifer lost her tail many years later. It seems that Clarence and I were trying to teach a smaller calf to lead, and we were not having much success, so we tied the lead rope to the tail of the prize heifer and led the heifer. Result, bobtail. There were many, many piano lessons for Ellen and Charlene.
I, Clarence, and Darrell had a Model A Ford to deliver papers on our paper route. One evening, with 11 girlfriends packed in the car, I drove up in front of Aunt Grace Higgison to pick up Vea. Aunt Grace, seeing the packed car, decided not to let Vea join with us. So I took the girls to the show and returned to pick up Vea. I'm sure it was a sacrifice for our parents to take all of us as a family on numerous camping trips year after year. We managed a family tent, but a camp stove and sleeping bags were luxuries that we never had. Some of our trips were to Warm Lakes, Payette Lakes, Craters of the Moon, fishing trips with Amy and Alan Bodley family, Yellowstone with Warner and Mary Gifford family, salmon fishing with cousins and uncles. These were highlights of our youth. They taught, and we hopefully learned.
A most necessary and important principle is forgiveness. We must be able to forgive before our repentance can lead to forgiveness. When schoolmates and neighbors were ridiculing us, Mother and Dad would counsel us to forgive and understand that where little is given, as most of our associates were not LDS, little was expected. we could live the golden rule, to do unto others as we would like others to do unto us. Of course, Mother didn't know that Darrell and Clarence, Levon and Gerald retaliated by putting the neighbor boy in the ant pile, minus his pants. They taught, and hopefully we learned.
Faith will sustain us. There's parents' faith in their children, which helps us to try to do better to merit that faith. I, Charlene, and Clayne Wardle, being about the same age, were playing in the yard. His little sister Claudette kept tagging along, so Clayne and I climbed a tree to get out away from her. Claudette climbed up the tree too. Clayne and I started spitting on her, Claudette, so she'd get down. She told us she was going to go tell and headed for the house. The two of us hurried out of the tree to head her off, but Claudette got there first and told Mother that we'd been spitting on her. Mother's response was, "My Charlene would never do a thing like that." This impressed me to try to live up to my mother's faith.
When any member of our family was ill or had an injury, we were taught to turn to our Heavenly Father in prayer and to the blessings of the priesthood. When Dad needed heat for his injured eye, it was through faith and prayer that our only cord we had was an old, discarded, unworkable extension cord which was put back into use. It worked for that time it was needed and then never worked again. When anyone had a special church assignment, like a part on a program or a talk to give, we were encouraged to ask for our Heavenly Father's help in carrying out that assignment. They taught, and hopefully we learned. Power of example, the devotion and obedience of many young people today reflects the example that had been set in their homes. By setting a good example, mother and father can influence character and inspire noble deeds.
When anyone needed Keith, I was usually looking for four-leaf clovers, searching for bugs, or picking flowers. I had a great love and appreciation for nature and beautiful music. I was always the last to be ready, the last to get in the car. The folks really never got after me much. Do you think having two older brothers on your case had anything to do with that? Or the time that they went home without me and I waited for a couple hours at the church house waiting for them to return, but didn't. I walked the 4 miles to home and found that they had eaten dinner and hadn't missed me. Our parents went to church with us. They never sent us. They took an active part in all church organizations. We were guided and encouraged to participate in activities. They knew the importance of the family and the associations with brothers and sisters' families. Visits to Grandma Harris's and aunts, uncles, and cousins were a special time for us. We were given responsibilities and were expected to do them to the best of our abilities. They were fun times. They were disappointing times. They were times we wished things might have been different.
They taught, and hopefully we learned, so that we may teach our children these truths, that we may be an excellent example to our posterity as our parents and ancestors have been to us.
Sometimes work and struggle fueled the torch and made the flame burn brighter. In the early morning hours and late into the night, that light gave Urshel and Alice and their family strength.
Down a narrow quarter-mile lane, not much more than a cow path, many events through the years we see unfold. Our first vision is of a hard-working mother of 5 boys, packing 2 large buckets of drinking water. She walks down this lane and across the road, now Highway 44, to old Sarah Jane's artesian well to fill her buckets. Behind her, also carrying 2 smaller buckets, is a curly-haired 6-year-old boy, the oldest of the 5. For 5 years there was no well, and drinking water for this little family was packed from a neighbor. Reason being, a decision was made. Shall we borrow money to drill a well, or wait until we can pay cash for it? We waited. A hard-working father struggled and labored many long, hard days and nights to build up the alkali ground so it would finally produce a crop. Finally, their own artesian well was drilled, beautiful, clear, cold running water. Later, as we go down this lane, we can see 5 little boys with bare skin running for the cornfield. Even later, we hear, "Rise and shine, boys. Time to milk the cows." The cows finally had a small barn built from logs hauled from the mountains with a team of good horses and wagon. No stanchions at first. They would just come in and stand. The smaller boys would hold the cow's tail from switching, and the older ones and mother and dad would milk by hand. The boys would tease each other by squirting milk on the seat of the milk stool of the guy next to him. The cats would come up by them, and they would squirt milk in the cat's mouth. Then in for a hearty breakfast of spuds and gravy, milk and eggs, and cornmeal mush. As the farm developed and the boys grew, it was the same rise and shine, only more cows, earlier hours, and improved barn facilities. Then after a hearty breakfast, it was off to school, down the tracks to Linder School, or Eagle, or Star High School, or out to hitch the best team of horses to the hay wagons. It was haying time again. We see one of the boys driving the team and wagon, Mother Alice tramping the load, and the other boys in their bib overalls and straw hats on each side of the wagon. The hay, bound in shocks and lined in neat rows up and down the field, was pitched onto the long wagons. Huge loads of hay pull up beside a large derrick, and with the Jackson fork and horses, the stack gets larger and larger and higher than most any other in the valley. In later years, we see the haying still being done this way. But now, down that quarter-mile lane, now a little wider, a car drives in and honks its horn. All 5 boys drop their pitchforks and run to the house. Mr. Tompkins is here. Time for music lessons. Work and music played an important part in these 5 boys' lives. The love and caring of their mother in the most depressed of times must be and is appreciated by all these boys and their children. The firmness and hard work taught and shown by their father was unappreciated many times, but he had a good heart and did love his boys, even though he did not know how to let them know. Hardships, accidents, runaway horses and wagons, death, and life made these 5 boys more determined than ever to live the gospel and love and teach their families the value of work and music and love. May each of us forgive those who trespassed against us, always, to love one another, to be a forever family, forever and ever, for all eternity. God bless my family is my mother's fervent prayer.
Our light comes from many sources, including the light of the sun by day and the moon and the stars by night. For the Melanders, one particular star meant hope, love, concern, as well as loss, fear, and loneliness. It also meant faith.
It hung there in the front living room window, so all passers-by could see it from the street. A small, white satin 5-pointed star in a deep blue field of satin fabric, held at the top by a thin wooden crosspiece and suspended by a heavy gold braid string. Gold tassels hung from each end of the crossbar, and a gold tassel fringe bordered at the bottom edge of the banner. It was beautiful. During World War II, each family that had a loved one in the military could proudly display such a banner of one or more stars, signifying members serving away from home. This banner represented our Wayne, senior brother among 3 sons in the Melander family. It hung there for the years of his absence from home. The star meant more than patriotic pride. It meant hope, love, concern for Wayne. It also meant our loss, loneliness, fear, even our very faith and prayers for him and others like him. After the war, the star in the window came down. Our brother and son had come home safely. The star banner was tucked away in a drawer, then later placed in a box in the basement, discarded but not forgotten. Our mother had vowed to her Heavenly Father that Wayne would go on a mission upon his return. The star was not forgotten. No, never.
Our lives are lighted by many different things. Some of our brightest happenings are the result of much trial and discomfort. There was no exception for the Gifford family.
I was just thinking, Nettie, I've always felt that I am supposed to be the mother of 7 children.
Well, you're no spring chicken, Mary. How old are you?
I'm 36 as of my last birthday.
Then I'd suggest you get busy since you now have only 4 children. Remember, the Lord helps them that helps themselves.
A year has passed, and another infant girl was born to Warner and Mary. Now there are 5 children in the family. Mary still keeps the feeling in her heart that 7 children are to come to their earthly home. After 3.5 years, Mary is again expecting. Because of her age, she feels this will probably be her last baby. When she is 5 months along, she has kidney problems that prompt the doctor to take an x-ray. The doctor's x-ray showed 2 infants being carried by Mary. The expected news verified Mary's feeling that she was destined to have 7 children. Back at home, she ponders how to break the news to Warner. She was sitting at the kitchen table when Warner enters the room.
Well, how did your visit to the doctor go this morning?
It went fine.
Did the x-rays show why you're having kidney problems?
No, but they did bring up another interesting question. Do you think 2 cribs will fit in our bedroom?
You mean we're going to have twins? Yippee! What's going on?
Oh, your dad always gets us excited when we're going to have a baby.
Yes, except this time we're having 2 babies.
Really?
That's what the doctor told me today. We're going to have twins.
That's fantastic.
You know, Dad has always gotten excited when we are about to have a baby. I remember when I went into labor with Levon. He put me in the back seat of the car and then proceeded to drive me to the hospital. Well, he drove so fast that when he hit a bump, I flew up and hit my head on something on the roof of the car. After Levon was born, I found a real sore on my head from that bump.
Boy, with 2 babies on the way, you better really hang on when Dad drives you to the hospital. He might just throw you right through the roof.
After much trial and discomfort on Mary's part, a boy and a girl were born November 7th, 1948. I was that infant girl and the 7th child of my parents, Warner and Mary. I am ever grateful for the feeling my parents had that they should have 7 children. Our parents wanted and loved each of us, and to this day we have always felt this love from them. They have always been dear, loving parents.
9 of Will and Alice's children worked the soil as they did. So many of the grandchildren had a childhood similar to that of their parents. The same toil, the same food, the same faith. Clarence and Vera Bood were gentle, hard-working parents who were determined to give their children what they needed to live secure, productive, and happy lives. Their torch was similar to Will and Alice's in terms of technology, and the girls' growing up years echoed the experiences of many of their cousins. They realized how blessed they had been by their parents' simple and pure lives.
My most memorable Christmas was when I was 12. First, I need to tell you a little about me. I grew up on a 25-acre farm south of Rexburg. We grew potatoes and hay, a large garden which furnished all of our winter vegetables. We had a raspberry patch and apple trees for our fruit. We had cows for milk, chickens for meat, and eggs. Once a month, my parents went to town for staples like flour, sugar, salt, oatmeal, etc. We had very few worldly things. My home consisted of 3 rooms. We had no indoor plumbing or television while I lived at home. You would have called us poor. This particular Christmas Eve when I was 12, the Lions Club delivered a basket of goodies to our home. My mother and father went through the basket and made up another basket, adding a few more things my parents had around the house. My dad loaded us kids into the car, and we delivered the basket to a very poor migrant farm family that lived in a 1-room shanty. A kerosene lantern was their only light. I remember the glowing, happy feeling as we drove home, a feeling I haven't forgotten in over 25 years. I know it was the giving that made it so memorable to me. Memory of Evelyn Bood Valentine, recorded by Davina Garrett on Tuesday, August 18th, 2020. Hi, sister. I thought I would write down a few of my childhood memories. Christmas was so exciting for me, putting up the tree on Christmas Eve, tinsel, icicles, and various decorations. Our gifts were small, a pack of gum, a book, Old Maid or Go Fish card games. In our sock was an orange, some hard Christmas candy, and some nuts. We usually had dinner with our aunts when we were little. When we were older, we sometimes went to my sister Donna's, and sometimes we stayed home. Saturday was wash and clean the house day. We mopped floors, washed windows, and cleaned whatever needed it. The washer was put out on the front porch in the summer. All the clothes were washed in the same water, starting with the whiter light-colored first, then working up to the darks. There was a tub of water set behind the washer for rinsing the clothes. A wringer was what we put the clothes through. It was attached to the washer. A small lever opened and closed it. My sister Vicky got her hand and arm caught in it, which left a small scar on her arm. In the winter, the washer was left on the porch. Salt was added to the rinse water. The clothes were hung on the line but never fully dried, so we had clothes hanging over chairs and other places until they dried. Winter was hard. Sometimes it was 2 weeks before the road would be plowed out, great for school closure, but nothing else. Snow angels, walking over drifts to visit a friend, and staying in reading and playing with my sisters were pretty much how it was in the winter. We had cows for milk, chickens and eggs, and bottled vegetables and fruit. We were happy and well fed. Our life was simple, uncomplicated. Working in the potatoes, cleaning house, and painting for relatives were some of the ways I earned money, 25 to 50 cents per hour. Babysitting was usually done for free. My sister Donna was a great teacher for helping me learn to sew. She would sometimes make me clothes in exchange for babysitting. I am a homebody. I like being at home. My family is my life. I have always loved working with children. I have spent over 45 years in primary, a few years in Young Women and Relief Society. I spent over 20 years helping with grandchildren. They are also the joy of my life. I hope this will help with the video. Love, Evelyn. Memories of Evelyn Bood Valentine, recorded by Davina Garrett on Tuesday, August 18th, 2020. My memories are very similar to Evelyn's. I might add that so many of my memories center around Mother cooking. She loved to bake and made the best sour cream from our cows, chocolate and spice cakes. She never frosted the cakes. I would put a big piece of cake in a bowl and pour in some milk or applesauce. I still like it that way. She often would pull off a piece of the bread dough and fry it. We called them scones, and they were delicious. I especially loved when Mom made donuts. It was a long process, but what a delight when we were finally given a warm donut dipped in sugar. Occasionally in the summer, we would take a trip to Uncle Carl's dry farm to enjoy the cool mountain location. Sometimes we would find choke cherries and service berries to pick. Some we would eat on the spot, the rest we would take home for jam. We took a picnic lunch with us, sandwiches or hot dogs purchased at the little market in Archer to roast over a fire. Mom would put some grape juice in a mason jar and sit it in the creek to cool. We picked watercress from the same creek to add to the lunch, another treat. Our home had an electric range in the main room which served as a kitchen, dining, and living room. On Saturday night, the old tin tub was brought into the same room for our baths. Our water came from a well near the house. When Mom would send me out for water, I would use the hand pump to fill the bucket and carry it into the house. It was heated in a tea kettle or a large metal dish pan on top of the stove. There was a big wood-burning range in one room and a smaller wood-burning stove in the main room. The bedroom was not heated, so during the long, cold Idaho winter months, Daddy would get up early in the morning and build up the fire. I would put my clothes next to the bed so I could grab them and dress under the covers, then run to the stove to warm up. I am very grateful to my parents for providing a happy, secure childhood through their hard work and sacrifice. Their examples of Christ-like behavior in word and deed laid the foundation of my testimony of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Memories of Marjorie Bood Gifford, recorded by Davina Garrett, on Tuesday, August 18th, 2020.
Alan and Amy Bodley had to be extremely hard workers because they kept starting over and building again from the ground up. Alan was an artistic dreamer who couldn't quite find what he was looking for, but he would know when he found it, and it had to be beautiful. He did find it and had the vision of what was possible, a mountain retreat complete with trees, blossoms, and falling water built with his own hands, a home on a rise with spectacular views, and close to sacred ground where a temple of the Lord would rise.
Songs of life. Songs of life, they ring through quiet steeples to distant valleys, and on the hillside with loving eyes, with loving eyes. Come sing your songs of love, and they will keep you from forever wanting, forever needing, forevermore, forevermore. Oh, and when the morning's new, it sings so softly to me and you. You know it's true, you know it's true. And I'll sing my songs of life, that I may hold you inside forever. And you will hold me, and I'll be yours, and you'll be mine. Sung by Ricky Tanner in the 1970s. Our home was alive with the sound of music from the very first second it was created. It had a father who loved and created music. It had a mother who sang the songs of life with them. Mom and Dad singing together was one of the sweetest sounds in the world. With music as a background, their union created 6 children who experienced, learned, loved, made mistakes, and basked in their songs of life. We were sung to sleep each night by the sound of our fathers transcribing onto the piano the melodies that had passed through his head as he had worked through that day. Carolyn became the second mother and teacher for her 5 younger siblings. Cheryl was serious and dreamed as he performed his not loved farm chores. Merlin was his follower, a thinker who became a masterful teacher. Elena was also a follower who wanted to try out almost everything and loved to play practical jokes on a gullible younger sister. Laureen was delicate, but made of steel. And Luann was a sprite who lived in the wilds of the farm. I do not know the number of generations ahead of our parents that passed their music on to them. I do know that our mother's mother, Alice Fuchs, was singing to groups at such a young age that she was placed standing on a table to be seen as well as to be heard. As a young man, our father's father, Frank Bodley, rode on horseback throughout New Zealand from 1904 to 1906, teaching natives to play the organs in their churches. He was known as Organ Frank. He was also known for his faith. He tells of the time when he and his companion were on horseback, and one of the horses slipped off the bridge into a deep pit. After failed attempts to get the horse out, they decided to pray, and his senior companion asked Frank to say the prayer. After prayer, the horse climbed up the side of the pit like a squirrel. He said, "That experience has never left me after 50 years. I often think of it, and the only answer is that it was a miraculous direct answer to prayer." The story became a song that generations of his descendants would sing over and over. Our dad's parents sang together. His father composed music, taught music, sang music, and played music. In our youth, songs warbled about the multitude of berries, peaches, pears, and plums to bottle and then to line the pantry shelves. Music chronicled the irrigation of thirsty fields, digging ditches, building sheds and barns and houses, haying and thrashing time, and the twice daily milking of cows. Soprano and alto were heard as Mom and her sisters talked around the quilting frames, plying their needles, and the young children would sit under the stretched-out quilts and listen. Tenor and bass belted out as my dad and his many brother-in-laws would trade work in the hay or wheat fields or go fishing together in the hills. Our songs of life included trips to the mountains with watermelon cooling in the streams, fishing, trout sizzling in butter, with much hand-pushing of automobiles, up hills and changing of flat tires. Music accompanied us to church, to concerts, to school, to dances, and once Alan's song, "When Syringas Bloom," became the theme for the steak, gold, and green ball. As the children married, Dad composed a song for each one of us, which was performed at our wedding receptions. Music was the background, as our parents loved beauty and appreciated nature. Our parents' yards were filled with trees, shrubs, flowers, and huge rocks hauled down from the hills. The rocks themselves became heirlooms. Father created a spot resembling a mountain ravine. He so dearly loved it. It chorused with the sound of running water, the scents of the syringa and pine trees, and demonstrated that the desert can blossom as a rose. This oasis was located on the east side of the farm. Meanwhile, a symphony of magnificent sunsets played over the west side of the farm. In later years, that became the very same sunset that would illuminate the Meridian Temple directly west of the farm, a temple which makes the surrounding areas sacred. We were not accomplished musicians, but music became our security, comfort, expression, and worship. Today, the songs of those years take us home again to remember and to be grateful for the lessons we learned, for the love that we felt, for the sacrifices made for us, and for the longing to be all together again. It was good for us to sing the songs of life together.
Grace and Earl Higginson, same as their siblings, faced the challenges presented by a depression and a horrible world war. They were not daunted by things that would certainly daunt generations starting out today. They faced the world with grit, dreams, courage, optimism, and a winning chemistry between them. They had dreams and worked toward them, finding happiness along the way. Each of their children carried their torch high and prepared to pass it on.
Music, light, love, all words that flood us with memories. For Earl and Grace Higginson, the music might be the song of the meadowlark, and the light and the love were everywhere. Daddy came in from chores and told us the snow was awfully deep. He'd walk with us to the bus stop. He went in front, dragging his feet through the snow to make a path for us to walk in. It was a long lane, but it didn't seem so long that day. I think I must have been grateful for Daddy's act of kindness at the time, or it wouldn't have been stamped so indelibly on my mind. But I didn't understand how truly blessed we were until I grew up and left home, and found that parents who loved and cared for their children like ours were a treasure, if they could be found at all.
Our parents were artists. Their media were the things of every day. Dad created with nails and boards, posts and wire, with disc and plow, and with bales of hay. Mother chose cloth and thread, pen and ink, fruit and jars, hoe and spade, and with it all her artist's heart wove music. She loved it, and she taught her children to love it. Dad too loved beauty and found it in horses. They chose for their canvas a peaceful valley in the desert, and set about creating their masterpiece. It was not easy, for the things of every day are often the hardest to obtain, and many were the times when some force of fate or nature seemed to snatch a palette knife and in one great sweep destroy the work of many years. They did what they must, began again. You cannot quit when it is a home you are creating. Others sometimes thought them foolish to start with such a barren canvas, but only because they had not seen the vision.
They say this is a desert place. Perhaps, to those who merely pass, who've never known her cool morns, nor caught the glow of setting sun upon her waving grass. A desert place? Perhaps, to him who's never been a part of sand and wind and sky, nor never watched a soaring hawk and yearned to rise and fly. I've known this part of Mother Earth away from bustling town. I've seen her gentle, quiet moods, and gathered flowers of purple hue strewn on her umber gown. A desert place? Nay, not to those who've lived and loved and to conquer sin upon this dust, this spot of earth, whose beauty lies within.
The children in our home came in sets, widely spaced. Vea and Marilyn had married and begun homes of their own before Jeff and I were born. Linda and Lisa came in the middle where the decades overlapped. Janie was the uniquely single child, born with her own set of unique gifts, the first of our family to go ahead and pioneer in another place. I don't suppose our home was perfect, but as I look back at my childhood, I feel nothing lacking. Dad was strength and Mother was beauty, and they created a world of those two elements, bound it with love, and gave it to their children.
Sometimes when I take smooth brown loaves from the oven, or open a bottle of beautiful peaches, or spread fresh clean blankets on bed, or sew late at night, I feel like Mama, and I'm proud. And when I feel loved and protected and safe, I always think of Daddy, and I'm grateful.
My dad loved my mom. To him, she was a queen, virtuous, lovely, of good report, and praiseworthy. He admired her, and her wish was his command. To my mom, Dad was happiness, lightheartedness, manly courage, and adventure. He was her love and her protector. To we children, Dad was strength, with his sun-tanned face and arms and his sleeves always rolled up above his elbows. He was affection and good humor, unless some animal got out of line. His grammar was southeastern Idaho, and though he tried hard, he never quite overcame it. He was clean. We always felt his heart was clean, and we knew his person was clean. His barns were clean, his corrals were clean, his animals were clean. He was straight arrow. He was absolute honesty and generosity. His fences were as straight as he was. To Dad, beauty was Mother, a good horse, and wide open spaces with green rolling hills, and it was the same to us kids. Mom was full of the love of learning. Her heart hungered for it. She was a very good student and graduated high school with honors. Her high school principal encouraged her to go on to college because she had such a fine, bright mind. She loved truth. She loved to read and ponder the history of the world and of our nation, but most of all, she loved learning from the scriptures and the words of the prophets. She loved the fine arts, opera, and all kinds of beautiful music. She loved beautiful paintings, and she loved beautiful words. She, with Dad, loved the beauties of nature, the glorious creations of God. She loved meadowlarks and roses and sunsets and trees. All these things she pointed out to us, and she wanted us to love them too. Mom and Dad agreed that they wanted to raise their children on a farm, and sometimes both Mom and Dad had to work hard in town to have the opportunity to work hard on the land and with the animals. But they were always working toward a common goal, feeding and clothing and teaching their children and giving them the very best life they could. Even when Mom was working away from home, her great love of gospel learning and her desire to share that with young people motivated her to accept a call as an early morning seminary teacher, where she served faithfully for 10 years. And every morning for 10 years, Dad helped her out to the car. If it was cold outside, he went out early and started the car and scraped the windows, making sure it was warmed up and ready for her. If there was snow on the ground, he shoveled a path for her, then warmed up the car. Mom's contribution to the fine arts was mostly canning picture-perfect jars of sliced golden peaches or creamy white, perfectly smoothed, never stringy pears, or in making lovely dresses for herself and the girls and shirts for the boys and Dad. She even made a beautiful suit for Dad and for herself when they served their mission at the Independence Visitor Center in Missouri. She was asked to sing solos often in church and found joy in directing choirs and writing programs for church functions. I suppose that though all of us loved the light and shadow playing on the rolling green hills or the fields of golden shimmering grain, and watching the horses running or grazing in the pasture, we girls grew up more like Mom. She has daughters who paint beautiful pictures, even amazing portraits, children who love words to read or to write into programs or verse, and a daughter who, with her husband, made a career in teaching music to young people, with the same passion with which her mother taught seminary, and with the same purpose of testifying of the reality and the wonder and glory of God. The boys became expert horsemen, and while one left the farm to become a master with words in sales and advertising, the other went on to college studying equine development and made his living doing what he and Dad loved most, training horses. Our home was a place of love and security. We children were well cared for and well taught. We are very grateful to be the children of Earl and Grace Higginson. More details. Mom and Dad were very much in love but had no money. It was the Great Depression. Mom had never worked away from home except to help her sisters when they had new babies or needed an extra hand with the canning, etc. Dad's income was at best $1 a day when there was work on the railroad. The financial future looked bleak alone or together, and they decided they would rather face it together. So Dad borrowed a car, and they eloped to Vale, Oregon, where they were married May 21st, 1932. They worked hard in the fruit orchards all summer and fall to earn enough money to go to Salt Lake City and be married in the temple on November 4th, 1932. Mom said that was when she really felt married. It is interesting that Mom and Dad raised their children in 3 different families, having 2 children born in the 30s, 2 more added in the 40s, and 3 born in the 50s. The births of their children spanned 3 decades. Vea Joanne was born on March 1st, 1933 in Boise, Idaho, and 3 years later Marilyn was born on March 20th, 1936, also in Boise. Dad was running his own dairy, selling milk and cream to private customers. When Allenbaugh Dairies organized, they sent their salesmen around to teach that only pasteurized milk was safe to drink, and signed most of Dad's customers for their new truck routes. So Mom and Dad moved to Napa, where they bought a grocery store, and Dad built a lovely new home for Mom, Vea, and Marilyn. Linda and Lisa Dawn, the next 2 daughters, were born in Emmett, Idaho in the decade of the 40s during World War II. Linda on May 17, 1943, and Lisa on June 16, 1944. When the United States entered World War II, food prices were frozen by the government, and Mom and Dad's providers for produce were sent to the internment camps. That took their hearts out of the grocery business, and they sold their business and their new house in Nampa and moved to the bench above Letha, where they bought 40 acres to farm. Leaving her lovely home and moving on to the bare farmland where there was nothing but hope proves what a good sport Mom was. For the first while, the family lived in a tent. Vea and Marilyn loved it and thought it a great adventure, but it must have been hard for Mom, who was expecting a baby. Dad planned to build a new home for Mom, but the government put a moratorium on building materials for houses. All good lumber was now to be used in the war effort. All that could be purchased was green lumber for farm outbuildings, so Dad bought what he could and set about building a chicken coop, and we became the chickens. We moved into the chicken coop and lived there happily, though we alternately roasted and froze, I've heard, until Dad could add on a granary to make us a bit more comfortable. I'm not sure the weather conditions changed a lot, but we did have more space. Thea and Marilyn have told lots of stories about the fun they had with the cousins there in the Emmett-Letha area. Mom and Dad's last 3 children were born in the 50s. Verna Jane, our angel sister, Jared Earl, and William Jeffrey were born in the decade of the 50s. Janie was born June 28, 1953, Jared, October 20th, 1954, and Jeff was born March 5th, 1956. How courageous and loving our parents were. Mother once explained to me that having been raised in a very large family in an area where there was much social stigma and persecution for being a Latter-day Saint was a very hard thing, and she did not want her children to go through those same experiences. So she decided to have only a small family. But the more she learned and understood the gospel and our purpose here on earth, the more she wanted children. Dad always wanted what Mom wanted. When their first child was a girl, some of Dad's family and friends said, "I bet you're disappointed that wasn't a little boy." But Dad always said, "I knew Grace would love to have a little girl, and I wanted one for her. I'm not disappointed. She's just what I wanted." And he continued to say that for the birth of each of the 5 daughters. He always said, "I guess I am man enough to take care of them. These little girls are just what I wanted." But you should have seen the excitement when the last 2 children were little boys. Dad's feeling was that he wanted to be their very best friend, and he tried hard to be just that. It was after Dad had a little boy that we moved to the Dry Farm, 320 acres out in the foothills just off the Emmett Highway to the east. There, the 2 little boys, and Lisa and I, could run the hills, learn to farm, to raise animals and ride horses, and enjoy the wide open spaces we all learned to love so much. We are very grateful for the kind of home our parents gave us and for their faith and their testimonies, their teaching and their love. What was it like being raised in our parents' home? It was wonderful.
John and Merle Higginson faced their world with a humility that made their dreams live and flourish. They laughed poverty in the face and showed that they could manage anything that they wanted. They wanted children, a small farm, animals, an adequate home, a sufficient income, and John wanted a clean and tidy butter dish. The torch that they held illuminated to future generations what a love of beauty, a sense of humor, artisan abilities, creativeness, hard work, and standing together could accomplish and be well worth passing on.
Family devotion was evident in the John and Merle Higginson family. The values of the held torch were burned deeply into each one of the children.
29-year-old John Denton Higginson married 18-year-old Merle Dean Harris in December of 1934. In the spring of 1935, they solemnized and sealed their union in the Salt Lake Temple before any of us, their children, were yet on order. The first home they could call their own was a little unlined 2-room shack on the alley at Holly Street in Nampa, Idaho. They paid $75 for the shack and $40 for the lot. They lived there, with Dad adding on a couple more rooms with surplus lumber from the shops or the Pacific Fruit Express Company where he was a new employee. By the time they left there, needing more elbow room, they had welcomed 3 little boys into the family, John Dennis, Carol D., and Richard Lynn. During 1941, they moved to an acreage they bought on Franklin Road, north of Nampa. They didn't live there long enough to add to the family, as they discovered deficiencies in the old farmhouse they couldn't live with. The living room linoleum rose from the floor, when the bitter winds blew from the north. In 1943, the 5 Higginsons moved to an acreage east of Nampa on East Powerline Road. This was home until after the same 3 little boys had married. The place on East Powerline was a mold in which 8 children, 6 sons and 2 daughters, were shaped. The place was our world. It set boundaries or opened pathways in the development of our tastes, of our vocabulary, of our ambitions, of our culture. It welcomed us, it cradled us, it comforted us, it soothed us, it pampered us, it loved us. It protected us from intrusion. It was willing to grow and change with us. It became one of our dearest friends. When we returned to the country of our childhood, we always dropped by to renew our acquaintance. In the order of prominence, the place consists of trees, ones to climb in, ones to build houses in, ones to pick fruit from, ones to swing from, ones to shade us, all to surround us and to protect us. Pasture, to roam in, to run in, to race in, to play games in, to irrigate. The ditch, to swim in, to make war across, to boat in, to leap across, to tub down, to join with the road as the constant villains in Mom's fear for our lives. The barn, to milk the cows in, to eat bran in, to eat dried beet pulp in, to visit with Dad in, to love farming in. The hay bin, to fight Indians in, to store hay in, even to sleep in. When we moved to the place in 1943, it was tending toward the condition of old age. The old green driveway gate sagged too much to ride on. The trees had been given leave to scatter their offspring at random. The fences were tired, the house a relic without indoor plumbing, with a dry sink to wash in, a tin tub to bathe in, a wood range to cook on and bake in, and heat water on. The place was over the hill. It had become introverted, a shut-in, or a cranky hermit. When we were grown, the place was young, extroverted, cheery and open. The front fence disappeared, the lawn gate gone, the driveway gate a memory. Trees gave way to sunshine, picture windows opened, light illuminated the soul of the old house. The outdoor toilet was deserted and disappeared. The pinks and greens of the 1950s core and the old yellow garage, the tool house, the chicken coop, the newer garage, and the coal bin all disappeared in open space to grow and change in. Where are the 8 Higginson kids? Why don't they come to supper when they're called? 5 plump loaves of hot bread straight out of the oven await the wrecking crew. A great pot of red beans simmered to perfection in the company of onions, great hamburger chunks, and a generous chili brick sits in the middle of the table. The hot loaves will be pulled apart, and butter will melt, and butter the chili as they are dipped into the savory juice. Come to supper! Dennis is up in his treehouse, really only a platform, in the big tree reading the Book of Mormon. His testimony was born there. He built the treehouse. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Carol is putting a splint on a wild bird's broken wing. His chickens are tended, fed, and watered. He wouldn't think of leaving them hungry while he went to eat. Lynn is in the barn room, the green room of the old barn, doing what Mom and Dad called leveling the place. Family treasures, letters, diaries, and so forth are stored there, and he is consuming the history of it all. David is at the piano. He practices. That was rare in the family. Later he will hum tunes at the table and be told time after time not to hum at the table. He can't help it. Music is inside of him. Mike is headed for the house with Dad. They went together to irrigate, each with a shovel over their shoulders. Mike is most like Dad, working with Dad. There was nothing Mike would rather be doing. Sherry is standing in the kitchen reciting and being coached by Mom as she hustles around getting the table set. "Freddie, are you awake?" "Yes, Nellie." "Where's your head?" "Under the covers, but I'm not a speck afraid." "Do you hear that noise, what isn't very nice?" "Yup, I wouldn't wonder but 'twas a little mice." "Oh, I don't like mices." Mom and Sherry, drama coach and student, and what a student. Tim is in the living room, kneeling by the end table. He is molding clay soldiers, a whole army of them, each one not a quarter-inch tall, but each marvelously formed with proportioned body, arms, legs, and head. Large hands couldn't have done it. He had amazing dexterity for one so young. Tam is nearby. She is protective of her twin. At first she mothered him, but now she has a baby doll of her own, and she is rocking it to sleep. It is impossible for Tam to remember a time she didn't feel the instincts of motherhood. Loving, cradling, rocking, and protecting. "Come to supper!" John Dennis, Carol D., Richard Lynn, and David Lee, Michael Dean, Timothy J., Cheryl Ann, and Tamara K. 6 boys and 2 girls make one mime. And with their parents, they make as close a loving family as you'll ever find.
The Light of Love.
My father was 29 and my mother 18 when they married, poor health having prevented Mom from finishing high school. Mom had gone through a great deal of pain and sacrifice, even against medical advice, to give birth to 8 children. Her poor health and challenging finances and living conditions, we all lived in a 1-bedroom house heated only by wood-burning stoves, had made life a struggle. Dad was already 45 years old when I came along, their first daughter after 5 sons. Then twins, a boy and a girl, came 2 years later. As a little girl, I remember my father joking, "We could handle children one at a time, but when they started coming by twos, we had to stop." Actually, we children felt very much loved and wanted. I remember asking my daddy once if he would sell one of us kids for $100. After a negative reply, I wondered if $1,000 would be enough. Dad said he would never sell one of his children even for $1 million. I could hardly comprehend that since money was scarce and children so plentiful. And once I asked my father if he really was glad he had 8 children. He said he was glad, but that he wished he had a dozen instead of just 8. It's a good, glad feeling to know that you're truly wanted and valued more than money or the things money can buy. In our family, almost every evening was a family home evening, as all of us preferred to be at home rather than anywhere else. Dad would attempt to read the lesson to us from the manual, but more often than not he would fall asleep in the middle of the lesson, sometimes in the middle of a sentence. Then we kids would sneak up to him and startle him awake, and he would be good for another few sentences. We grew up on an acreage outside Nampa, Idaho. Imagine 8 children growing up in a 1-bedroom house heated only by wood-burning stoves. An indoor bathroom was added when I was 3. We younger children slept on hide-a-beds in the living room, and the older boys slept out in the unheated tool shed or the hay bin, even in the winter. We raised our own beef and drank raw whole milk. We ate beans and soup a lot. The only time we got candy was at Halloween and Christmas. We never bought it. All the time I grew up, I never remember eating in a restaurant. I'd never heard of mozzarella cheese until I went to college. We never went camping or took vacations like most people did, but since my father worked for the railroad, we had free passes for riding the train and loved to travel from Nampa to Salt Lake City for a day trip. Christmas and the annual family reunions were the highlights of our years. From my life story comes this childhood memory. In the spring, when the hay was gone, the hay bin was the place where the shearing of the sheep occurred. On shearing day, I would watch, fascinated, as my father slowly and carefully clipped wool from each sheep. One year, I recall, a member of the bishopric came and sheared our sheep with his electric shearers in a fraction of the time it would have taken Dad to do it by hand. The bishopric member would take no money for his work. When he was gone, my father made a comment, a simple statement that has stayed with me throughout my life. He said, "That is the kind of man who will go to the celestial kingdom." The last time I was with my mother, just prior to her passing, I knelt by her bed where she seemed to be in deep slumber, one from which she would not awaken. She was 90 years old. The 13th of the 15 children of William David Harris and Alice Fuchs Harris, she was the last survivor of her siblings. Having missed my father for over 20 years since his passing, it was time for her to go, and we were happy, thinking of the joyous reunion she would experience with her beloved John, her parents, and all of her siblings who had gone before. I took her aged hand in mine and tearfully stroked and kissed it. I thought of my mother's hands and all they symbolized to me. Her life of service and sacrifice in raising 8 children, the uncountable hours of cooking, cleaning, sewing, labors of love that flooded my mind with sweet memories of being nurtured by those precious hands. As a child, I remember being fascinated by the way her hands held a book, the way her fingers turned the pages. I watched spellbound as she sketched, and her hand and pencil magically transforming plain white paper into beautiful ladies in gorgeous gowns. From the time I was a baby, my mother sewed most of my clothes. I remember as a teenager trying on a beautiful dress in a store, but it was too expensive to buy. Mom took mental notes of its design and went home and created a replica of that lovely dress just for me. I thought of the beautifully tailored suits she had painstakingly sewn for me to represent Idaho, competing for Miss Future Business Leader of America in 1969 when I was a senior in high school. She also sewed my entire college wardrobe. Her skilled hands crafted beautiful dresses and formal gowns of velvet and lace, of white brocade with white rabbit fur cuffs, and of georgette chiffon that made me feel elegant as I danced and swirled through college. So much of what I am came from her. Though untrained, she was naturally gifted in writing, singing, dancing, sketching, speech, and drama. Her talents enriched my own life immeasurably as she shared, taught, and coached me in recitations and poems from the Youth's Companion, the same book from which her mother had taught her. My father once wrote an account of his life, but while he went into great detail about the days of the Depression and riding boxcars between Idaho and California, he had failed even to mention the births of some of his children, one of whom was me, and I felt cheated. So, as his grown daughter with children of her own, I interviewed him again, asking him to tell about his feelings when each of his children was born. He said things like, "Well, when Dennis was born, I was working for 30 cents an hour. When Carol was born, I was working at the PFE shops. Again, I was disappointed at first." I realized that the responsibility of providing for his family weighed so heavily upon him that he remembered the events of his life, even the births of his beloved children, by what he was doing for a living at the time as points of reference. He had worked very hard and very diligently at a tedious, unpleasant, tiring job for 34 long years in order to do the best he knew how to provide for his large family. One of his sons once wrote, "When I went on my mission, I was always conscious of Dad and Mom sacrificing at home to keep me there. When Dad fell and broke the small bone in his leg, and then finished out the week at work so as not to lose any pay before being treated for it, I was sure no dad ever sacrificed more than that. I can't help but cry every time I recall it. It represents to me something very important, the commitment my dad had to take care of his family." Perhaps a part of love is giving up some of the dreams you had for yourself and planting them in your children. Though neither of my parents finished high school, the children were taught to value an education. All 6 sons put themselves through college and graduated and became teachers, though some later diversified, and their children became artists, writers, builders, musicians, and speakers. Mom and Dad produced stable, decent citizens who have added to the qualities of their families and communities throughout the years. The torch has been handed down from generation to generation and will be yet passed on. It has been kept burning by both the usual day-to-day events in our lives and also by generous gifts of sacrifice and compassion that transcend the usual. Both the spectacular and the ordinary keep the torch burning. Aunt Ruby tells us of both.
Love, handed down from generation to generation, will yet be passed on. The torch has been kept alive and burning by both the normal day-to-day events of our lives and also by generous gifts of service and compassion that transcend the usual. Both the spectacular and the ordinary are essential ingredients to keep the torch burning. Aunt Ruby tells us of.
It's difficult to picture any family in words. The feeling that are the nearest and dearest to our hearts cannot be expressed to others without losing some of their dead. I believe we were a typical family, if there is such a family, a father, mother, and children, 4 boys and 2 girls. We welcomed the children into our homes and enjoyed them, each one with their special, endearing ways. We shared happy times and sad times, growing with each experience. We enjoyed camping, fishing, and hunting trips when we could find time to go. It was a special treat to enjoy a candy bar or ice cream cones. Of course, the ice cream was eaten to the tune of "Don't bite out the bottom, lick faster, it's dripping. Don't you dare get it on the car seat." Remember this, dads and moms? I sure do. We look back over the years and wish at times they could be relived. But I know we learned from each mistake. We sometimes disagreed on many things, but we learned we could still love each other in spite of this. Children learn to work and give and share while very young. Gary and Clayne, the small boys, were eating breakfast. Gary was putting sugar on his cereal while Clayne waited impatiently for his turn. Gary took too long, so Clayne grabbed the sugar bowl, turning it upside down in Gary's dish with the words, "Here, take it all." That's giving. When Gary was 11 years old, he helped his dad in the neighbor's hay. He purchased his own and Clayne's school clothes that year. After he was out of school and working, he would loose change from his pockets on the television and allow the younger children to get their milk money for school lunch from it.
Clayton worked part-time at a clothing store after school on Saturdays and always asked, "How much do you need?" Claudette purchased for Kathy her first bicycle. Michael, Brian, and Kathy too had their turns helping. Now in later years they watch us, their parents, closely to see any needs we might have and supply them. We as parents have tried always to stand by our children, rejoiced in their joys, and suffered with them in their sorrows. Looking back over the years, we find there are a few fences we could mend. When Mike and Brian left home, they could not agree on who was the owner of a certain baseball mitt. Mike had it for a while, and then Brian laid claim on it. Christmas of 1985, Mike received the mitt for a Christmas gift from Brian. Brian received a set of cap guns and a holster for his 39th birthday from Clayton and Mike because they had broken his guns, having a shootout on Christmas Day when they were small. It's going to be fun to see what comes next as they recall the past. Our greatest test of love and compassion came with Brian's fight with diabetes. As the years passed, the loss of vision, heart attacks, finally open heart surgery, and then failure of his kidneys. A kidney transplant was the only answer as soon as possible to save his life. The best and quickest solution was within our own family. All members of the family were willing to be tested for compatibility. Mom and Dad were too old. Because of Gary's heart surgery and health problems, he was considered too risky. Claudette had only one kidney and was not considered at all. Clayton, Mike, and Kathy were tested. Clayton and Michael matched in all tests. It's unusual for three siblings in a family to match. Clayton from the first wanted to be the one to give his brother a kidney. Clayton never considered this to be a sacrifice or praiseworthy. To him, it was just something someone would do when there was a need. As parents, we had a hard time coping with this. We were torn because we wanted the best for both our sons. Brian was so ill, but would Clayton's sacrifice be too late to help? We couldn't voice this concern to anyone. We turned to our Father in heaven for comfort and prayed that Clayton would be blessed with good health and Brian regain his health and strength. We knew that Brian would always have many problems, but things had to be better. The weeks of tests and preparations were stressful. Many trips to the medical center in Salt Lake were made. Brian had his gallbladder removed and then suffered cardiac arrest, and we feared our battle was lost. Brian came back fighting and more determined than ever he was going to make it. Surgery was scheduled for July 18th. We all gathered in Salt Lake. All children were there to lend their support. Michael and Eileen opened their hearts and home to us, giving us loving care. The night before surgery, Michael, Clayton, and Dad gave Brian a very special blessing. We rested better that night. The next morning brought a delay as Brian had an insulin reaction. It was so ironic to have to wake him up so he could be put back to sleep for surgery. It was an anxious night for Clayton, coming into the hospital well and facing surgery that was going to cause him much pain. We all rejoiced when surgery was over and it had been successful. On the third day, Brian was able to walk slowly to Clayton's room. Sometimes feelings run too deep for words and they couldn't speak. But the looks they exchanged spoke volume, and tears were streaming down all our faces. This time was not without its humor. Carolyn gave Mike a t-shirt with words, "Spare Parts Man." Mike came home wearing the shirt and a red cape. Mike says if anyone needs his kidney, they can have it. He just doesn't want to know it beforehand. Clayton endured much pain but recovered and is doing well. Brian had additional problems, and it took months before he was fully healed from the kidney surgery. He had 2 additional surgeries since, but he keeps his spirits up, and it is so good to see him have more strength and be able to work and do things he hadn't been able to do for months, even years. We are not a role model for other families. All families have the sorrows and problems as we have had. I'm sure they have and will be drawn closer together as we have been.
Ah, the many facets of light from the torch. How can they ever be counted? Through the eyes of children, that light is noticed, appreciated, incorporated, and transmitted. We now carry the faith in God that our parents lived for, the hopes and dreams that Will and Alice had as they started out together, unaware of Harris armies. They had a testimony of the gospel of Jesus.
And so our days go on. Will and Alice could have had no idea what they had started with their contribution to the house of Israel. The Harris Army is a royal army, and its torch will still burn brightly when future generations may have little idea of who Will and Alice were and what they did. As technology has advanced to aid in the gathering of Israel, it can also help us and our children, their children, and future generations of children to know who we are, why the torch is so important, and to pass it on and on until victory and the perfect day. Behold, a royal army with banner, sword, and shield is marching forth to conquer on life's great battlefield. Its ranks are filled with soldiers, united, bold, and strong, who follow their commander and sing their joyful song. Oh, when the war is ended, when strife and conflict cease, when all are safely gathered within the veil of peace, behold the King eternal, that vast and mighty throng shall praise his name forever, and this shall be their song. Victory, victory, through him that redeemed us. Victory, victory, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Victory, 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 through Jesus Christ our Lord.